what you want to bring that's different to the table out there in art. What are your ambitions as artists? An art historian that I really love, and I think he's very readable, he just died a few years ago, is E.H. Gombrich. And one of the themes that Gombrich stressed, that Gombrich constantly pursued, was the theme of the unfortunate circumstance of the modern artist in having to do the whole thing from scratch. Because we have to come up with the idea, motivate ourselves to do it, find a way to support ourselves and execute it, believe in it enough to sustain this over time so we can get a series or a body of work or something. Then we have to go promote it, find a way to get it out there, find the client for it. This is just an incredible burden and pressure on artists that actually never existed before modern times. Because until the birth of the avant-garde in the 19th century, the client came first and the artist came second. But the pressure on the artist today is absolutely to self-generate the whole thing, the whole structure. You got to find everything, the idea, you know, there isn't somebody out there saying, I want personal art about, you know, that would have dangling stuff from the ceiling, you know, that would include mylar. Would you make me some of those pieces, and then I'll buy them. I'll give you a stipend so you can make them for me first. It's just the rare artist at the tippy top, the really hyper successful ones in the international art cities who have, you know, whole workshops like Rubens or somebody did, and they don't have to worry about this. So the rest of us are in this incredible situation for an artist to be in. This is not the nature of an artist to have to do this. Artists are really, according to Gombrich, artists are stimulated and actually produce great art when there is a specific understood audience for the art. That's his argument, that the greatest art in the history of art comes when the audience is really clear and really well understood. Right now you're in school, your audience is pretty clear, your peers and your teacher. That's good, and your other teachers. We're talking about a very small audience while you're a student. Then what happens when you go out into the world? Well, the predicament and pickle we're all in is that there's not an audience waiting for you. And it's unclear who your audience is going to be. So one of the things I think is important for young artists, and I'm following Gombrich's lead and suggestion in this, is I think that it's never too early to just begin to think a little about it. I want to be clear about this. I'm not saying that I think it's time for you to start figuring out your audience in some, you know, absolutely categorizable United States government way. This income group with this education level and this gender is my audience, or this sex is my audience. I think more specifically that you want to think a little about your audience in terms of what am I trying to say. I think one of the problems of art that gets us all into this trouble is that we have been, in the big scheme of things, since the birth of Romanticism, in the little scheme of things, probably just in the sort of me culture, we are too much focused on self-expression and the self in general. And maybe it was a cultural, historical drive that it had to come and drive to the self. But and had to reach it and do everything else. But I think that self-expression is not enough to fully propel most artists forward, because I think, and you can quarrel with this if you want, but I think we all make our art to show to at least one other person. By nature, there's something about artists that wants an audience. I think. It's different from philosophers who, you know, according to Plato, didn't need an audience. I mean, I don't believe that either. They're kind of show-offy too. But artists have a show-offy kind of nature, a need, a hunger, a longing of some sort for fame, of some sort. Now, fame doesn't have to mean, fame can be very modest, but if it were just self-expression, you'd be willing to make your art and put it in a closet and show it to no one ever. And there are some weird artists who have been like that. You know, they're usually the outsider artists, like Henry Darger in Chicago, you know, and they die, these old guys. Any of you heard of Henry Darger? They die and then they open up their room and oh my gosh, you know, reams and reams of drawings he's been making all these years and nobody knew. That's somebody who really was just compulsively self-expressing himself. But I think anybody who comes to school, anybody who thinks about being an artist, that and I'm one of you, this is a we thing, I'm like this too. We want an audience. And I think that once you realize that that's not some thing to be ashamed of, but rather is an integral part of why you're making art, it actually can open up some of your art making to, you know, some new ideas. Obviously, the corrupt version of this is to just figure out who your audience is and target the art for the audience and forget your self-expression in some way. But the healthy end of it is that the artist, I think, needs an audience more than just himself or herself, and that self-expression isn't enough. And I would go further. I would say, you know, it's really hard not to express yourself in your art. If you're making art and you make a line, there's something to the way you make a line that says your way of making a mark. It's like dogs on fire hydrants. I mean, we make this mark, and you know, that's what these experts who analyze, you know, found drawings, they say this is a Michelangelo or this is a, you know, Tintoretto or whatever, even though nobody knew. They know how to look at the evidence of the mark and tell. So I think it's hard not to express yourself, and I think you have to find some other reason. After the guild system in the Middle Ages, artists had to become businessmen. Starting in the Renaissance, you look at these books of, you know, that they have of Leonardo or anybody, and there's records of, you know, basically what would boil down to PR, you know, and being a businessman and record keeping of, you know, lapis lazuli in, lapis lazuli out, you know, these expenses and things, and workers maybe to keep track of what's going on in terms of supplies coming in and out. But the businessman aspect of being an artist is, outside of any guild system, is a big part of being it, and we can't escape it now. So what's the system we have now for artists, for getting your work out there? Galleries. And it's a really lousy system, but in a kind of rough justice way, it kind of works. And I say this, you know, as somebody who's had, you know, long periods without gallery, periods where I had galleries, periods where I had lousy galleries, you know what I mean? Periods where I switched galleries and knew instantly I'd made a mistake. You know, I've kind of jumped around. So it's not some ideal system I'm trying to protect, and I'm not somebody who's super benefiting from it. But I can see it with enough detachment that in a rough sort of way, it kind of works given what the predicament of artists are in now. Because there's just too many artists out there making too much art for everybody to have a chance at something like this, which I will tell you is so exciting. And if you know, I walk out the door and I fall over on Oval Road and smash my head to death, I had a great day today and yesterday seeing my art on the walls, so it wasn't an unhappy life. So when you see that, you know, weird headline that, you know, your visiting artist fell over on Oval Road and died, she died happy because she got to see her art here on these walls. It was okay. A little short of a life, but I would have liked to go longer. But I think in a rough justice way the galleries work. The negative thing is that it's our only venue to get our work out there. And it's a really limited outlet. And alternatives are unfortunately few and far between, and the alternatives always are cast in this light of, oh, it's an artist co-op, and so it's kind of crappy art. And that's a problem, because it might not be, but there's something about the dealer's willingness to take the risk and invest the money of the rent and the personnel and the announcements that says, gives, you know, a little approval to your work. And isn't that gross? In other words, we're saying money says something about the quality of the art. I think that money and art have been from the beginning and always are connected. Here's why. Because art is a luxury. Over and out. It's not a necessity, except in some metaphysical, spiritual way. You know, people need art. It's not. It's a luxury. It's one of the first things that can go. And believe me, at CSU, I'm sure the art would go before the football team would go. Right? They'd cut this department out before they cut out your football team. Same with my university. My job's going to go before the assistant football coach is going to go. So art is a luxury. Luxury is built on excess, is only available with excess wealth. Who has the excess wealth? People with extra money. So you can't have it without money. It's something hidden underneath art that we don't want to think about. It's the dirty part of art, that it is connected to money in some way. And I think facing up to it, coming to terms with it in the sense of saying, you know, this isn't something awful if I sell my work. I'm not doing something corrupt. I'm not doing. Now I'm, like your professors here, one of the privileged artists in the country, because I'm a beneficiary of the contemporary Medici, namely the university. They are my patron, the university. I don't have to sell my paintings to the point where I have to support myself on them at all. I don't have to sell any paintings. I have a nice job with, you know, which gives me this freedom. And the university system, and there are a lot of universities around the country and colleges that have art departments, is the contemporary patron of the arts par excellence. And it's one reason why there are a lot of artists. But it's also, you know, a really lucky thing for us, because otherwise we really, really wouldn't be able to make our art. So, you know, I think that we, in understanding that the art and money nexus is there, we're more honest with ourselves, and we cut through some of the cotton candy stuff we say about art all the time. Art is uplifting, art is good for people, art is this. Art isn't necessarily good for people. In fact, that's going to lead me to segue into the second topic I wanted to bring up to you. You see any way that art might not be good for a society, or might not always be good for a society? This whole question I'm tossing out at you has been tackled in really fascinating essay in the 18th century that was introduced to me when I was a young student and had a real profound effect on me. Rousseau's letter to D'Alembert. Geneva was about to loosen its censorship laws, and it used to not allow theater. And and Rousseau had been, you know, exiled to Geneva, and he all of a sudden read this letter by D'Alembert, this essay by D'Alembert saying, Geneva needs a theater. This would be good for Genevans to have a theater. And he rallied the people toward the idea that Geneva could use art, this theater. And so Rousseau wrote this passionate response in his letter to D'Alembert saying, no, it doesn't. Theater, broadly speaking, clearly Rousseau means all the arts, so it's being used as in a metaphorical way for all the arts, because it's the most extreme version of all the arts. And he starts to list all the ways in this letter to D'Alembert, which is not that long and hard to read, by the way. It's pretty, in translation, very readable. He starts to list all the reasons it will be bad for Geneva. He starts with, well, you know, right now, they really have a nice society. They have decent morals. They get along with one another. They're good to their families. But you get a theater, and all of a sudden, the women are going to want to go see the play, and they're going to look at their clothes, and they're going to say that they're not good enough to go to the theater in. They need fancier clothes. And they're going to go and have to spend money on these fancier clothes and take the money away from the family and the things that they were spending it on before, and their natural sense of happiness will be disrupted as they start to compare themselves to people around them in clothes that are a little bit fancier and better than theirs. Moreover, they're going to go to the theater and what are they going to see? A bunch of people on the stage who are pretending to be people that they really aren't. And then Rousseau says, and this is what we want? We want people to go and admire people who are pretending to be who they aren't? In other words, we're going to take authentic, decent people who present to the world what they really are, and we're going to suddenly turn them into people who admire people for being able to persuade you that they're somebody they're not. And they're going to come home and they're going to feel inadequate. And they're going to start to think, you know, I'm just a stupid cobbler. I don't have anything going for me. And they're going to start imitating the people who are pretending to be who they aren't. And the theater, which is about artifice, will ruin the authenticity of these people who were happy with themselves. They were at one with themselves. They were whole with themselves. It will destroy their sense of satisfaction in their own families. They'll look at themselves, they'll think they aren't as beautiful as the people in the theater. And this will ruin this whole good life. But that's not the end of the essay, because what Rousseau does is he says, theater's great in Paris, however. Keep it there. Make more of it. Because they're already such sleazeball people. They're already so inauthentic. They're already competing with one another to dress better. They're already spending all this money to show off and be who they aren't. Feed them theater because, you know, they're really, if they don't have theater, they're really dangerous. If they don't have art, they're really dangerous because they're already so corrupted. So his conclusion at the end of the essay, this is a bad summary. This is the cliff notes to it. You got to read it yourselves. Art is good for a bad, corrupt society. But it's bad for a good society. That's his argument and his conclusion. It's really an argument stolen somewhat from Plato, who was very suspicious of the arts. And I am not suspicious of the arts. I love art. But I think the simple platitude, art is good for people, is something that is eternally to be questioned. And in our more specific thing, I think we can ask ourselves, do I have a purpose outside of self-expression here, or is it just art therapy for me? And if the purpose is outside of self-expression, obviously, then it's linking up to some kind of moral purpose, either to instruct and change something that's bad, maybe to just create beauty in a life that otherwise doesn't have it, maybe to criticize, maybe to be very overtly political and address some, you know, that you think your medium could address something and reach an audience to help. But I think it's very bad to continue to just stick to the platitude that art's good. Art's good. It's got to be good. It's always good. You know, there's much more complex aspect of contemporary society and all societies is how art fits into it. So I would just ask you as young artists coming along to think deeply about these questions and not just chuck them to the side as not of interest to you. They will make you more profound people. They won't help your art. By the way, none of these questions will help you aesthetically. It's not going to make you draw a better line or make a better Mylar series. That's you as the artist. But in asking really hard questions, it makes you a more profound and interesting soul, which in turn affects, in an indirect sort of way, your aesthetic. So it's an indirect kind of thing to ask the hard questions about art, I think. The agitation part of your art career dies down some as you grow older, meaning I think it's natural when you're younger to be somewhat agitated. You're ambitious, you want to get your art out, you're frustrated. And I was bothered by what I thought was really stupid art a lot of times, and constantly heavy-handed irony where it was so obvious, you know. But after a while, if you sustain your work as an artist somehow, you find a way, maybe you're a waiter, maybe you're, you know, teacher, maybe you're a carpenter. I know a lot of artists who do construction work, and you just, because you're alone so much and you're making your art, and you don't get agitated anymore. And actually what happens is it all starts to look the same. The curious flip around that happens slowly is now every installation piece I see, and I like some installation artists, but you know what? I don't need to see Bruce Nauman wannabes anymore. You know, clown torture's enough. I don't need any more of those, and there are a lot of people still doing that. I also I'm not impressed by big, huge, vast scientific experiments by artists. I'd rather go to Rochester, New York, and see the Eastman Kodak plant, where it's fascinating to see the whole thing, the landscape of real science at work, real technology at work. I'd rather go to a biology lab and hear a really eloquent molecular biologist speak to me about that than have some artist do a turn on DNA or something. Because it's always so shallow compared to what the scientists are doing. So now it takes a lot to arrest my attention with putatively shocking art. And Damien Hirst, by the way, did the typical artist route. Big, huge shock with the dead cow and the dead fish and slicing it up sideways, followed by polka dot paintings that anybody can buy and hang in their living room. Yes, I have a Damien Hirst. Followed by posters of the polka dot paintings that you can get for $750 with his signature on it. I mean, is there anything more predictable and that the avant-garde moves over into the middle brow, buy a poster, taste, the connection between art and money? There it was in spades, and a lot of artists do that. They shock first, and then they make tame little paintings later. Because who wants really to have a dead, sliced up cow in their living room? Even the Saatchi brothers probably stored it, somewhere. There is a lot of art out there that's sort of my personal statement art. And I think that is also a problem. And, I feel that I'd like to make art about my feelings looks an awful lot like the next person's I feel I want to make art about my feelings. I go into looking at all art figuring the artist is doing the best with what she or he has. The problem is what she or he has often been really limited, either by this education or by the artist himself or herself. So that a lot of artists are coming to put their art out there now, and they really have had a narrow art education. I don't just mean academically, I mean in terms of just ideas I was just telling you about, essays to read. I mean, to be a good artist, maybe the best bet is go major in English literature and make art on the side, or major in history and make art, because one of the things I worry about, and I'm an art teacher in an art department, is how little my art students know. And that narrow parameter within which they're working of knowledge, and I'm not talking about feelings I'm talking about knowledge. I mean, I've encountered art students who cannot tell me the date of the Civil War. I've encountered art students who don't know there were 2 world wars in the 20th century. I've encountered art students who don't know there was a Byzantine Empire. Now, I've encountered art students who don't know there were great cultures other places, or worse. They see a Byzantine mask, a Byzantine Madonna, and they bring it into their art. But they don't know a damn thing about Byzantine art. Or they see a Chinese scroll, and they like the way the tree is in the upper right-hand corner, and without knowing anything about Chinese art or Chinese culture or Chinese philosophy or the history of China, suddenly they're just, dragging those in, and they're saying things like, I really like the way this looks. And I don't think that's enough anymore. It's a modern approach to making art, because, basically Picasso said, I love the way these masks look, and he dragged them into his art. But I think we've been doing that for 100 years, and it doesn't work anymore. Everything I'm talking about is a kind of, we have to negotiate these very difficult waters. Not too personal, not too academic, but I don't think personal art is the answer. I guess I'll sum this up really quickly, because it's almost time for this to wrap up anyway. Rather than worry about what we have to look out for, I would simply say this: train yourself in your craft. Narrow your craft, not strategically, but find out what you're good at. Start to do it a lot. Start to not do some stuff that you kind of like to do still lifes, even though you're doing these abstract things on the side. I would say you're at the stage now in your late, junior, senior year of your undergraduate education where you should start to say, I'm not going to keep just doing this. And certainly by graduate school, I think it's time, and I've said this to a couple students here, to focus. Let it slowly, naturally happen that you stop making some art and you keep pursuing this other art, and you've already had your broader education, now's the time, and start to read and think about issues that surround art, but just keep developing your craft of the specific art you're choosing. Because most of us can't be Picasso and be sculptors and drawers and painters and theater people all at once. Most of us are not Leonardo with all these skills. If we're lucky if we have one talent that we can do, you know, and find a way to do it really well. So hone your skills and deepen your mind, and I think that's the approach to developing a rich soul-wise, interesting artist. If you make it, God bless you. You know, if you don't, at least you've led a meaningful life.